Hey everyone! So let's talk about the Indian Constitution. I know, you might think of it as this huge, kind of dusty rule book, but it's so much more than that. It's really a living, breathing guide that has steered the world's largest democracy for over 75 years. The real question is, how?
I mean, seriously, how does one document written way back in the mid-20th century manage to stay relevant for a country with over 1 billion people and just mind-boggling diversity? Well, the answer is fascinating, and the secret is actually baked right into its DNA.
Okay, so here's the first piece of the puzzle. The Constitution isn't just a set of rules for how things are right now. It's also a blueprint for the future. Think of it like this. It's got this built-in to-do list for the entire nation, sketching out the kind of society India is always trying to become. Now, this to-do list has a formal name, the Directive Principles of State Policy, or as you'll often hear them called, DPSPs. These are basically the moral compass of the Constitution. They're instructions for every government, no matter who's in power, to work towards a fair and just society. They're really the soul of what it means to be a welfare state. But, and this is a big but, here's the twist. You know how you have fundamental rights and you can go to court if they're violated? Well, you can't do that with these directive principles. They're what's called non-justiciable, which is a fancy way of saying you can't sue the government for not following them. You can't legally force their hand. And this slide really breaks down that difference perfectly. Think of your fundamental rights as a shield. They're negative because they stop the state from doing things to you, like taking away your freedom of speech. Directive principles, on the other hand, are like a sword. They're positive. They command the state to do things for you, like provide equal pay or protect the environment. One is about political freedom, the other is about social and economic justice. Which, of course, leads to the most obvious question, right? If you can't take the government to court over them, are they just a bunch of nice-sounding ideas? Do they have any real teeth at all? Well, this is where you see their hidden power. These supposedly unenforceable ideas have been the direct inspiration for some of India's most important laws. That principle of equal pay for equal work, it led directly to the Equal Remuneration Act. The idea of a right to work, that's the backbone of MGNRGA, the massive rural employment scheme. So no, they're not just suggestions. They're the actual blueprints for real-world legislation. So that's the government's to-do list. But, building a country isn't a one-way street. It's not all about what the state owes you. It's also about what you, the citizen, owe the nation. And that brings us to the other side of this whole bargain. And these are the fundamental duties. Now, these weren't in the original Constitution. They were added in 1976. And the whole idea was to balance the scales, to serve as a constant reminder that with great rights come great responsibilities. They're basically saying, hey, to enjoy all these freedoms, you've also got to do your part. So let's just quickly compare them. Rights are your legal entitlements, what you can demand from the state. Duties are your moral obligations, what's expected of you. And here's that key word again. Just like the directive principles, these duties are also non-justiciable. It really reinforces this idea of a social contract. The Constitution protects you, and in return, you have a duty to protect it. And that brings us back to that same exact question, doesn't it? If there's no legal penalty for not doing your duty, do they actually make a difference? Or are they just another list of well-meaning suggestions? The answer is a huge yes, and the way it works is actually pretty clever. While you might not get in trouble for violating the duty itself, many of these duties are directly backed up by actual laws with very real punishments. So the duty to respect the flag? There's an act for that. The duty to protect wildlife? Yep, there's a law for that too. So the duties act as the moral and constitutional why behind the laws that expect us to be responsible citizens. All right, so we have a roadmap for the state and a guide for the citizen. But societies evolve. Challenges change. A rule book written decades ago can't stay frozen in time. And this brings us to the third secret to the Constitution's long life. Its built-in power to change and adapt. Just look at that number, 106. That's how many times the Constitution has been amended since 1950. And that's not a sign of weakness, it's a huge sign of strength. It shows this document was designed to bend, not break. It was built to evolve. But you can't just go in and change things on a whim. The process is tough, and it's tough for a reason. You need what's called a special majority in both houses of Parliament, voting separately. There are no joint sittings to push things through. Then the president has to give their approval. It's a high bar designed to make sure any changes are serious and have widespread support. And some of these amendments have been absolute game changers. The 42nd Amendment was so massive, people call it the mini-constitution. The 61st was a huge deal. It lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, bringing millions of young people into the democratic process. And then you had amendments that gave real constitutional power to local, village, and city governments. These aren't just small tweaks, these are major overhauls. So this incredible power to edit the nation's foundational document, it leads to a pretty big and kind of scary question. What's to stop someone from taking it too far? This brings us to the final and I'd say most dramatic part of our story, the Constitution's ultimate firewall. I mean, really think about it for a second. If Parliament can change any article with enough votes, what stops a future government from just deleting fundamental rights or getting rid of elections altogether? Is there any line that simply cannot be crossed? For years, this was the subject of a massive tug-of-war between Parliament and the Supreme Court. At first, the court said Parliament's power was unlimited. Then it did a complete 180 and said fundamental rights were off-limits. The whole showdown came to a head in the legendary 1973 Kesavananda Bharati case. And the court came up with a brilliant compromise. Parliament can amend the Constitution, but it cannot destroy its basic structure. So what is this basic structure? Well, here's the crazy part. It's not a list written down anywhere in the Constitution itself. It's a doctrine, an idea, created and defined by the courts over time. It protects the absolute non-negotiables, things like democracy, secularism, the rule of law, and free elections. Basically, the very soul of the Constitution. And that is untouchable. And that's what is so remarkable. The ultimate protection, the final firewall for the Indian Constitution, wasn't written by its original framers. It was an innovation created by its guardians, the judiciary. Now, it's a controversial idea for sure. Some argue it gives unelected judges too much power, but others see it as the Constitution developing its own immune system to protect itself. And so we end with that fundamental, ongoing tension that really keeps the Constitution alive. We've seen its grand ambitions, the deal between the citizen and the state, its ability to change, and its ultimate safeguard. And it all boils down to this one profound question. In this dynamic dance of democracy, who gets the final word on the soul of the nation? The people's elected representatives or the Constitution's appointed protectors? That's definitely something to think about.